there, thanks for joining today. So if you clicked on this video, I'm guessing it's because you want to start painting in oils but don't necessarily know how. Well, I have good news for you because I've been there before and I've spent the money and I've tried the things and I've done the hours of learning on YouTube and I think I have a pretty good system. So I'm here to share that with you. Let's start with some basics, shall we? Oil paint. There are many kinds and many different colors, overwhelmingly so. Oil paint is usually organized into two categories, a student grade and a professional grade. Most companies have both options. For example, Winsor Newton has their oil color and they also have like the professional artist color. They just name them a little bit differently. Blick has studio color and then they have their artist oil color. Really, the big difference between a student grade paint and a professional paint is student grade tends to be mixed with some other additives to give it body and flow, and there might just be a little bit more presence of cheaper ingredients in there versus a professional grade is going to be cleaner, a more pure oil paint, and it tends to have higher, better pigment. That's not always true. There's some student grade paints that are very, very well made and very incredible. For example, Blick Studio Color. They do a very good job with their student grade paints. But that tends to be the difference, and the higher the pigment and the richer the color, it tends to be more expensive. But as a beginner, I personally would just start with a student grade paint because you don't know if you like it yet or not. So start simple, start cheap, and then once you know that you like it, buy professional grade paint. So with that, what colors would I buy? Pretty simple. And the reason I have picked these is because you can mix basically any color you want from it. There's nuances, but for the most part, you can get what you want with these colors. Titanium white, burnt umber, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, cobalt teal, quinacridone magenta, yellow ochre, and probably a cadmium yellow and a cadmium red. And between those, you could basically make anything you want. Okay, so that's paints. Let's move on to brushes. Also, very similar to paints, there is a wide variety of quality when it comes to brushes. And my advice for brushes is the same as the paints. I would buy cheap and affordable oil brushes until you know that you want to stick with it, and then I would invest in very high quality professional grade brushes once you know that you really like it. For student grade ones, my best advice would probably be to go to blickartmaterials.com and go to their oil brush section and buy a brush that's specifically made for oil paint. It's gonna be easier, but ultimately you don't really know what you like until you try it. So I don't even know if I have advice on a certain type of brush you should get as a beginner because it really depends on how you like to paint. So I would just get a cheap variety of different sizes, get some big ones, get some small ones. I'd get some rounds, I'd get some filberts, but just try to keep it really basic. But the biggest thing is to have, you know, a couple big brushes, a couple medium brushes, and a couple small brushes so that you can just kind of play with that. Once you get into the professional level brushes, I recommend Rosemary Co. They are amazing. They are such high quality brushes. I love them. I will continue to buy all of my brushes from them because they are perfect and amazing. This is the Andrew Tischler Tisch Dagger. one of my new favorite brushes ever, which can be found on their website, Rosemary Co. All of that in the description box below if you need links for ease, but that's brushes. Go with student grade until you know you like it. Then I would invest in nicer stuff. So, oil painting. What do you need? Well, for general setup, you are gonna need a rag and you are gonna need a palette. There are artists that get nice glass palettes that are gray and you scrape it off and all this stuff, which is great. I've tried that, but honestly, I'm kind of a neat freak and I really don't like scraping the paint off to clean it. I might change my mind down the line, but as of right now, it's not my thing. So my advice to you, it's cheap, it's easy, and I have a clipboard that has a paper palette on it. It's gray, so that you know kind of what color you're mixing better. But yeah, it's just a paper palette that I have on a clipboard, and obviously I use them quite thoroughly. You don't have to use them that thoroughly, but that's just, I don't like wasting things, so I try to get as much out of each palette paper that I can. But I have found that this way, instead of scraping, like I said, you just pull the sheet out, throw it away, and then rip off a new one, and then you have a fresh palette to work with. And then the reason for the rag is because if you need to get color off or change colors, whatever, you need something to kind of wipe your brush on to get paint off or whatever. So that's palette and the rag. On the topic of a rag, you can also, I recommend having paper towels, both for if you get stuff on your hands, if you need something to wipe your brush off even more thoroughly, whatever. I just would always have that because it's good, clean practice. While we're talking about palettes, this is optional. This is called palette knife. And I would get one down the line. As a very beginner, I don't know that it's super necessary. People say not to mix your paint with your brush, and there's a bunch of reasons why, and they're all valid. But I think if you're first starting out, just keep it simple and have fun. The reason people use palette knives is to mix paint on their palette instead of mixing with their brush. But honestly, I oftentimes mix a lot with my brush too. So I don't know. It's not important, but I figured I would add it in here because there are many people that say that that's how you should do it. But when you're first starting out, maybe later. Now we've started painting. When you're painting in oils, straight out of the tube can, depending on which brand of paint you have, they all have a different flow, and some of them don't have great flow. So that's why artists will mix a medium into their oil paint. You have a few options with this. A really easy go-to is Liquid Original. This will also shorten the drying time of an oil paint. It's about 24 hours, and you can kind of work with it again, 12 to 24 hours, depending on how thickly you mix it. But when you're mixing this with your oil paint, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 parts oil paint to 1 part liquid, no more than that. But this gives a little bit of flow and movement to your paint, so it's easier to kind of move around. And like I said, it shortens the dry time. So I always have this on my palette, and I use it quite a lot. The other thing that people will mix into their oil paint is linseed oil. Depending on the artist, there's a bunch of different mixtures that people can have, but I would say linseed oil and terps are kind of a very common go-to with oil paint. Terps is quite toxic to breathe. So that's where this whole toxicity about oil paints tends to come from, because of the solvents that we mix with them. So if you don't have a well-ventilated room, if you're worried about toxicity, I would avoid terps. There are people that use, like I said, linseed oil. It's a small amount because it'll make it runny pretty quickly. It also will take much longer to dry. So if that's what you're going for, that's great. I don't really use linseed oil. I tend to use it straight out of the tube before I would mix in linseed oil. Again, it kind of comes down to your personal feel, which only comes with experimenting. So you don't know unless you try. But when you're first starting, I would just say go with Liquid Original. It tends to be, it's the easiest to work with, and it's a quick dry time, and down the line, try some linseed oil just to compare and see what you like. Okay? Now that we've painted, you know, we've done the things, you need to clean your brush. How do you clean your brush? On a daily level of cleaning my brush, I use something called brush dip. This is from Geneva Fine Art. And this is a mixture of artist grade safflower oil and clove leaf oil. So you dip your brush in, and then those rags that you have, you wipe off the paint, and then I'll dip and then I'll wipe. And until I get kind of the majority of the color out, and let it sit overnight. So dipping your oil brushes in a high quality oil will protect it, it'll keep them hydrated, it'll keep them soft, and it'll keep them from like fraying at the edges. It keeps them wet so that, you know, the next day, or if they sit for a few days, they don't get dry and hard. I use this daily. Every time I finish for the day, I'll dip it, wipe it, dip it, and let it sit with this. If you're looking for a deep clean, like you need to get all the color out of the brush, they're gonna be sitting for a long period of time. That's where mineral spirits come in. This one's Gamsol. It's a low odor, so it's better for you than turpentine, but it's still, the vapors are still toxic and harmful. So well-ventilated room always when dealing with this. How do you do this? Well, there's another wonderful product called Silicoil, and all it is, I'm not gonna open it, but inside there's a metal spring kind of coil, and you pour the Gamsol into it. You can kind of see, yeah, you can see the liquid in there. And you fill it just above the coil, and then you dip your brush in, and you can kind of like push your brush into the coils, and the mineral spirit takes all of the oil paint out. And the great thing about the Silicoil is that over time, once it rests, all the paint will kind of drift to the bottom. And then when you need to, like if it builds up too much, you can pull the coil out and then safely and in an environmentally friendly manner dispose of the mineral spirit. Take a rag or a paper towel and wipe it all out, put the coil back in, and then you fill it with fresh Gamsol. So that's how you would clean it. But for deep clean, I highly recommend this. It's easy to work with, and it really gets in between your brushes, so it gives it a good clean. There are some basic tips and rules that people follow when it comes to painting oil, but I think as a beginner, sometimes that can feel a little much and a little intimidating. So I'm not going to tell you any of the painting tips yet, because the most important thing is to just go play. I would not go straight into expecting a masterpiece out of this. Just honestly buy some cheap canvas paper and just mess around and play and do small color studies and just get a feel for the medium. It doesn't need to be big or important or, you know, something that lasts 100 years. I would just get used to the materials first. These are products that I use every single day, and over the course of many years that I've been oil painting now, I have kind of tried and tested a bunch of different things, and this is what works for me. It's my best workflow, and they're products that are very high quality and will, you know, down the line still be archival and help your paintings last for a very long time. I hope you have found this helpful. Let me know what you think. If you have any more questions, leave those in the comments below. I'm happy to answer them. I'll either write back or I will make another video answering your questions. But welcome to oil painting, and I hope you enjoy the process, and let me know if you try any of these products, what you end up liking. So with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and happy creating. I can't wait to see you in the next one.
But love grows, nobody knows like me. She talks kinda lazy, people think she's crazy, and there's a mystery.